series. This one is on the concept of harmony, Pythagorean harmony, how that harmony arises out of the tetractys. If you look at the relations between the rows of the tetractys, you start with 1, then you have 2, 3, then you have 4, 5, 6, then you have 7, 8, 9, 10. The rows increase by 1 digit at a time. Okay. We get from this the idea that there are certain relations between the rows that correspond to harmonious relations, harmonious ratios, or as we would now probably put it, harmonious fractions. So, if we start with the first 2, then we have a relationship between, we're counting the number of numbers in the rows. So we get a relationship of 1 to 2 at the top, and that is called the octave. An octave is a harmonic distance, harmonic ratio. If we go down again 1 step, we get a relationship between 2 and 3. That's a ratio that is also harmonious. That ratio is particularly important. It's called a perfect fifth as a musical ratio, a perfect fifth. Now, if we go down 1 step further, we get a relationship between 3 and 4. That is also very significant. It is a ratio that is known as an harmony in music. It is called the perfect fourth. And as we go down again to the relationship between 4 and 5, what we get then is a major third. So we're comparing steps in this tetractys, and it gives us ratios that are particularly significant musically. So if you tune an instrument and then say stop a string at a ratio of say 3 to 4, then what you get is a perfect fourth. Now, this was an easy thing to accomplish in Greek music. You had flutes, which could be set to this, and you had stringed instruments like lyres could be set to this as well. And so what you have is a relationship between mathematical objects, relations, ratios of numbers, which appear in the tetractys, and then these give you the wonderful harmonic relations in music. So the harmonic relations sound beautiful to us, to our ears, because they reflect these ratios. Now, you can, in the Western tradition, you can fill out these ratios. I've only given you 4 so far. Octave, perfect fifth, perfect fourth, and major third. But you can fill them out with other ratios, and then you will get other harmonic relations. You can fill it out, say, with 12 of these such. And you will get a system of harmonies. And you can play music in those harmonies. It will sound attractive. It will sound pleasing to the ear. Now, basing a system of harmonies on these pure fractions gives you what is called a just intonation in the music, and it reflects or expands upon the Pythagorean intonation, the Pythagorean system, which was given by these fractions that are contained in the tetractys in a particularly neat way. Just intonation is wonderful if you have singers, because you can, the singer can adjust the sound to hit the pitch exactly right. They are able to, they're flexible enough to move their combined sounds so that they combine perfectly. But when you have a modern stringed instrument that is fretted, like a guitar or a lute, or in fact not fretted but fixed in terms of its what it can do in terms of its notes, like a piano, then you have problems. And the problem arises when you want to change keys within a particular piece of music, because the ratios that will hold for one key, though they, of course, the same ratios hold for other keys, you can't move within one key up to another key in such a way that you preserve these harmonic relationships, so that what you will get as you change key or go up too far is it will go out of tune. It will sound wrong. So when you had modern instruments, fretted instruments, and harpsichords, etc., then you had a serious problem of how to make that, your extended sense of music, work. For example, as a symptom of this, as you move upwards, if you move upwards, scale upwards in fifth chords, fifth harmonies, you don't come back to the original note. You miss it by a small amount. And the small amount you miss by is around 1%. And that 1% of a missed alignment is called a comma. Sometimes it's called a Pythagorean comma. And instruments have to correct for this in some way. How are they going to do that? You can imagine the massive problems of all of this in an orchestra. How are they going to correct for this problem? The solution to this is to have temperaments. A temperament is a change in the pitch of the notes to move them off their perfect alignments as fractions into something that is slightly different, so that you can correct for these misalignments as you move from key to key. These temperaments change the sound of the instrument so that the chords, the harmonies that are played, will sound right-ish, as you go from one key to another, as you move up a keyboard, as you move up a fretboard. The intonation is able to adapt slightly to give you a better sound than the very rough sound that you would get if you didn't have these changes in intonation. Now, this created a plethora of temperaments. Bach, Beethoven, Mozart all had their own temperaments that they could choose for their instruments and play in those temperaments depending on what they were playing, on what they want, how they wanted it to sound. In the 18th century, there was, however, a move to rationalize this chaos of temperaments. And what you have then is a system called equal temperament. Equal temperament is what we have today. It is how the piano is tuned today. It is tuned to equal temperaments. Now, this originated, as I say, it originated in the 18th century. It originated in a very strongly rationalizing period of the 18th century, which is called the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment ran through the 18th century, dominated France and French figures. Voltaire is an Enlightenment figure, Diderot, so many. One who formulated this idea of equal temperament is Rameau. And here is his book in which he gave the theory of equal temperament harmonies, the theory of harmony by Rameau. And it didn't dominate immediately, but over time it did. I think I'm right in recalling that Chopin might have been the first composer who composed entirely in equal temperament. Some people have thought that the well-tempered clavier of Bach is also an example of equal temperament, but that's not true. It was shown not to be true some years ago by a mathematical musicologist who showed that Bach's well-tempered clavier is not an equal-tempered clavier. Probably. Now it's played always on a well-tempered piano, thus creating problems. Now, you may think, well, going back to these Pythagorean ratios and the just temperament, the just intonation, what is the sound of that? Well, it's an interesting question. The likely thing is that you have never heard them, because equal temperament has replaced any form of just intonation pretty much completely. So you may never have heard an instrument played in this way. You can hear it, you can search it out, and I suggest that you do. But it is not an easy thing to come by. And most instruments, as I say, are tuned to the piano. Some early figures complained very bitterly about this. For example, if we go to, say, well, as an early figure, like a mathematician, musicologist, Robert Smith, who complained against Rameau's equal temperament, he said, "The harmony in this system of 12 semitones is extremely coarse and disagreeable." It's a strong statement. From a more recent person, we have the cellist Pablo Casals, probably one of the most famous cellists, well, the most famous cellist of the 20th century, who said, "Do not be afraid to be out of tune with the piano. It is the piano that is out of tune. The piano, with its tempered scale, is a compromise in intonation." And what he's pointing to there is the fact that if you have a stringed instrument which is not fretted, which does not have fixed frets, then you can change the intonation on the fly. And that is why you have these non-fretted instruments, the violin, for example, the viola, the cello. Non-fretted instruments are capable of adjusting their intonation to what they are playing. And that is a very useful thing. So what we had then is a very formal system of fixed ratios, which gave us harmonies in music. We then introduced instruments which required us to have temperaments that was different from just intonation. And we ended up with a dominance of a particular, extremely disagreeable sound, as Robert Smith said, from in the equal temperament instrument. Because everything now is pitched to the piano. Everything has to be tuned to the piano. If you have a piano there. So, where does that leave us? Well, one thing that's important is that, and this is an important thing to understand and to say, that the whole idea of intonation is an important story in music, but those ratios carry over into other forms. For example, into the shapes, the canvas shapes of paintings. Paintings are often on canvases that have particularly attractive ratios. For example, a 2/3 ratio is a perfect fifth, and it's an attractive ratio for a picture. 3/4 gives you the perfect fourth, and it's an attractive ratio for a picture. For canvases are often made in that dimension, in that ratio, in that aspect ratio, because it is an attractive form. So, for example, if I show you, this is a 3/4 photo card that is in perfect fourth harmony. That is what a perfect fourth looks like as a piece of card, as a card on which you would print a photograph. Take a note of it. And now compare it to a perfect fifth. This is a perfect fifth. Now, forget the difference in the dimensions, in the size of these things, because what we're really interested in is just simply comparing the ratios of the length and the width. This 2/3, 2:3 ratio is a common photographic ratio. It's what you would have gotten if in say 1980 you had taken your photographs to a chemist, as we would have called it. If you had taken your photographs to a chemist, to a photo lab, and they had given you back your snapshots, they would have given them back to you as prints of this size, because your negatives are of that size. They are a 2:3 ratio. They are a perfect fifth. Another common size is this. It is an 8:5. Again, ignore the fact that it's considerably bigger than what we had before, but it's a common photographic size. It is the famous 8:10, used everywhere. What is an 8:10? That reduces down to a 4:5 ratio. So it's really a 4:5 ratio, simply in inches it becomes an 8:10. This is the major third. So we have the three major photographic forms, which are also the forms often of paintings. It carries on from that, and it gives you perfect harmonies in the form of the size itself. Okay. All of this carries over into modern art. For example, not only are they painted on canvases, which are often of these sizes, they correspond to ratios that are Pythagorean, that rely upon the detractus in a particular way. If you look at the the shapes, the oblongs and the squares of a Mondrian painting, look carefully at them and remember the sizes that I just showed you. What you can notice, if you're astute, is that the shapes are 2 to 3 ratios, they're perfect fifths, or they are perfect fourths, and sometimes they are octaves, 2 to 1 ratio. Now you may think, oh, that's just Mondrian, just got it lucky. No. Mondrian carefully constructed his paintings using these Pythagorean ratios. He was concerned to replicate these, and they signified something for him. They signified perfect harmonies. And his colours have the same significance. Note that he uses yellow, white, red, blue, and sometimes black. He never uses green. Why? Because for him, the colours that he used, the ratios between them, the relations between them, were like the Pythagorean ratios. They are colours that give you a strikingly right effect. But he disliked green strongly, to the extent that in choosing how to walk from his flat from his studio to the art store where he would buy his canvases, he would choose a route that would not pass through or pass by any green. He disliked it to that extent. Okay, so what we have now is the replication of these Pythagorean forms in these different manifestations in art, in photography, in music. All of these things are harmonies and harmonics that matter. And they play a role, because they are harmonic and pleasing, they play a role also in religion. Religion becomes associated because of the spiritual aspects of these harmonies. The religions become associated with aspects of these sounds. Religious music, back in the Pythagorean day and in Plato's day, the sounds were religious in significance, and what you get as music moves through the centuries, it keeps for a long time that religious significance, and the harmonies that are within it contain these Pythagorean sounds. Remember, for about 1,000 years, most of that was choral music. It was voices together, which, as I said, could hit those harmonies perfectly. And so you hear early music, and what you're getting is Pythagorean sounds. There's a CD by the Hilliard Ensemble of the Mass of Notre Dame by Machaut. That was done in Pythagorean intonation, if you wish to hear it. And it runs through. Then you have the compromises of music as you have mass music, as you trying to play louder and to a larger number of people. Then you are pushing it out to a larger audience. You are also having to introduce dissonances into the music in the form of temperaments that are not just intonation. And as you wish to have the music become more and more elaborate, as you wish to change keys within a piece, then you have to make those temperaments work for your music. And then we come to today, where all music, in some sense, is dissonant music. It is not harmonious in the way that it once was. That was something that people complained about well into the 20th century. But nevertheless, that dominated and succeeded. In the next lecture, I'll talk about the next aspect of this in the Tetractys, and how these harmonious relations began to also carry over into the cosmos, how the cosmos itself was a reflection of these harmonies that one could grasp onto and one could see in the natural world out there. Okay, I'll see you then.